students to Unit 4. In this unit, we're entering Layman's Chapter 7, and you are required to read Chapter 7, Section 1. So the chapter is broken up into sections, and we're going to slowly move through sections of Chapter 7 over the next couple units. So in Unit 4, we're going to read Chapter 7, Section 1. And in this section, we are entering into the topic of truth tables, which we will explain more as we move forward in the next units. But in this section, we begin to enter into symbolizing English arguments. And we will also look at the difference, and you'll need to know the difference between atomic statements and compound statements. So an atomic statement would be something like, the ball is on the table. That would be an atomic statement. A compound statement would be, the ball is on the table and it is out of air. So that would be a compound statement. You have two atomic statements that are compounded together. Even something like a conditional statement, such as, if it rains, then I will bring an umbrella. That is a compound statement, because if it rains is an atomic statement, and then I will bring an umbrella is an atomic statement. But the whole thing is a compound statement. Some of the symbols that you're going to learn and be required to know by heart is the tilde, which is essentially a dash, which represents negation, the negation of an atomic statement or a negation of a compound statement. The dot, which represents the conjunction of two statements together. The V, which represents the disjunction, which is or. So to review, the tilde represents not, the dot represents and, the V represents or, the disjunction. Then we have the arrow. The arrow represents a material conditional, so it represents an if-then statement. So the arrow represents an if-then statement. The double arrow, another symbol that you will learn, represents a biconditional, which is if and only if. So it represents, the double arrow represents a biconditional. And another thing you will need to learn and pay close attention to in this chapter is the idea of a well-formed formula. That when we begin to take English arguments and symbolize them and put them into symbols, those need to be in a well-formed formula. And that's just a fancy way of saying they need to be well-formed. They need to be in a certain structure so that we are able to identify the main components of the statements. And this is usually done by the use of parentheses and brackets. So you start the first order parentheses, then you add brackets, and it's also used with commas. Many students at this stage of the course sometimes start to slow down and start to have a little bit of trouble understanding why it is that we're translating English arguments into symbols. And as Layman says, translating arguments into logical symbols allows us to see explicitly what the structure of statements and arguments are, and thus be in a better position to evaluate arguments for validity. So it helps us to see explicitly the structure of the arguments, and so that we can evaluate them for validity, which is the goal we're moving to be able to know how to evaluate arguments of whether they're valid or not. So within the unit, a file named Truth Table document is provided in the course documents of the section of the Blackboard shell. And for this week, you'll not need to use the Excel portion of that document, which we'll get to later with truth tables. This week and going forward, you can use the symbols provided in that document to do the homework that involves symbolizing arguments, or if you know how to use an alternative keyboard on your computer, and in order to use symbols via your computer, you're welcome to do that as well. But this document is provided so that the symbols are provided that you can cut and paste. and use them that way.